Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you and I served together in Congress for 15 years. We didn't always agree, but I believe we shared some common values: a belief in defending democracy and human rights abroad and honoring the Constitution at home. That's why I voted to confirm you. I believed you would stand up for those principles. You haven't. You've done the opposite. And you used to speak with conviction about the importance of foreign aid as a tool to advance American values and interests. Then you stood by while Elon Musk took a chainsaw to USAID and other assistance programs. That has left a staggering toll: broken trust with countries, openings for China and other adversaries, and countless preventable deaths of children and others. Take Sudan, for example.
The freezing of humanitarian aid to Sudan had devastating consequences that extended far beyond politics. It directly resulted in the deaths of innocent people, including children, when the U.S. government halted funding and support to organizations operating emergency food kitchens. Nearly 80% of these life-saving operations were forced to shut down. This wasn't just a bureaucratic hiccup, it was a human catastrophe. These food kitchens were the last hope for millions of famine-affected individuals, and their closure meant that a basic necessity, food, was suddenly out of reach for countless families. In regions already teetering on the brink of collapse due to ongoing conflict and economic instability, this blow was particularly harsh. People didn't just go hungry, they died. Mothers, fathers, and children succumbed to malnutrition, related illnesses that could have been prevented with timely and consistent aid. This wasn't a case of logistical failure or inaccessible supply chains. The food was there, ready, stored in warehouses. Tons of emergency supplies rotted away because they were not allowed to be distributed. Bureaucratic red tape, compounded by political decisions, stopped this aid from reaching those who needed it most. It was a conscious choice to withhold resources that could have saved lives. The consequences of such decisions go far beyond individual suffering. They damage America's standing in the world and erode the trust that partner nations and humanitarian organizations once placed in the United States. Sudan is a country in crisis, and by withdrawing support, the U.S. created a vacuum that others, often adversarial nations like China, are quick to fill. This loss of influence isn't just diplomatic, it has strategic implications. In abandoning the people of Sudan during a moment of great need, the U.S. also surrendered ground in the broader competition for global influence and moral leadership. Moreover, the situation in Sudan is not just another crisis, it has been labeled a genocide by the administration itself. That should demand an extraordinary response, not retreat. The withholding of aid in the face of such a designation is especially troubling. It communicates indifference at best and complicity at worst. A country that once prided itself on championing human rights and stepping in to prevent atrocities has instead chosen silence and inaction. The message this sends to the world is clear: political convenience outweighs human suffering.
And while you've turned away from a genocide in Sudan and invented one in South Africa, you teamed up with President Trump to throw the Ukrainian people under the bus and have been played like a fiddle by Vladimir Putin. Of course, Donald Trump not only said he would end the war in Ukraine on day one, he also said he would end the war in Gaza on day one. And yet last week you were all running around to Gulf states giving away very sensitive American AI and chips technology, but doing nothing to end the war in Gaza and get the remaining hostages returned. You know that for 78 days, the Netanyahu government did not allow a scrap of food to enter Gaza to reach over 2 million civilians. 57 children have died from malnutrition so far, and more than 14,000 children are in imminent danger of dying of starvation. As Cindy McCain said last week, and I quote, "Families in Gaza are starving while the food they need is sitting at the border." That is a gross violation of both U.S. and international law. What did you do? Nothing.
At the same time, individuals from war-torn regions like Sudan, who had already been vetted and approved for refugee status, found their entry blocked or delayed. These were people whose lives depended on reaching safety. They had endured years of waiting, background checks, interviews, and security screenings, only to be turned away at the final gate. Meanwhile, applicants who aligned with a politically convenient narrative were welcomed with open arms. This blatant double standard undermines the integrity of the refugee system and calls into question the values that are supposed to guide American immigration policy. The refugee system was designed to be a lifeline for those in danger, not a tool to promote racial or ideological preferences. By selectively recognizing some refugees and ignoring others based on false claims or political expediency, the system begins to resemble a game of favoritism rather than a humanitarian safeguard. It sends a clear message to the world: if you're the right kind of refugee, you're welcome. If not, no matter how dire your circumstances, you're on your own. This shift in refugee policy also has a broader impact on global human rights efforts. The U.S. has long claimed to be a moral leader in protecting displaced persons and providing refuge to the persecuted. When this leadership becomes inconsistent or self-serving, it creates a ripple effect. Other countries look to America as a model, and when the model is broken, it gives license to others to follow suit, or worse, to abandon humanitarian obligations entirely. There is also the issue of how such policies affect the public's perception of refugees. By framing white South Africans as victims of a non-existent genocide while ignoring real humanitarian crises, the government fosters confusion and misinformation. It diverts attention from actual atrocities and creates unnecessary cultural and racial tensions at home. It distorts the reality of who needs help and why. What's especially painful is that these decisions often go unchecked. Bureaucratic silence and political cover provide the illusion of legitimacy. But underneath, it's clear, lives are being valued unequally, and access to protection is being rationed based on race and political usefulness. This manipulation of refugee policy not only betrays the core values of fairness and justice, it endangers those who rely on America's promise of safety and undermines the very credibility of the nation on the world stage.
To disclose what I'm saying and what we're talking about with a foreign leader, because then they won't talk to me. Diplomacy doesn't work that way. About the student visas, let me say this. I don't deport anybody, and I don't snatch anybody. The State Department does not have officers in the street snatching everybody. What I do is revoke visas, and it's very simple. A visa is not a right. It is a privilege. People apply for student visas to come into the United States and study. And if you tell me that you're coming to the United States to lead campus crusades, to take over libraries and try to burn down buildings and acts of violence, we're not going to give you a visa.
Is that what Ms. Ostork did?
We're not going to give you a visa.
Is that what she did? Come on, Mr. Secretary.
And every single one of these cases, the factors are different. The bottom line is, if you're coming here to stir up trouble on our campuses, we will deny you a visa. And if you have a visa and we find you, we'll revoke it. And we're going to do more. There are more coming. We're going to continue to revoke the visas of people who are here as guests and are disrupting our higher education facilities. People are paying money. These kids pay money to go to school, and they have to walk through a bunch of lunatics who are here on student visas.
Disrupting the foreign policy of the United States.
I want to do more. I hope.
One of the most telling examples involves a student named MS Osk, who co-authored a newspaper op-ed critical of her university's stance on the Gaza conflict. She made no threats, no anti-Semitic remarks, and had no links to terrorism. Her writing was thoughtful and peaceful, protected by the First Amendment, yet her visa was revoked, and she was detained in Louisiana. Her case wasn't isolated. It reflected a broader trend of retaliatory action against students who voiced opinions unpopular with the administration. This isn't about national security. It's about punishing those who dare to speak out. The Secretary's public statements make this agenda painfully clear. He proudly claimed, "Every time I find one of these lunatics, I take away their visa." It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a boast delivered with confidence. The use of the term lunatics to describe students exercising free speech is not only degrading, but also reveals a deep intolerance for dissent. The visa revocations are being carried out not because these students posed real threats, but because their views were inconvenient. This sets a dangerous precedent. When visa revocation becomes a tool to silence protest, it creates a climate of fear on campuses. International students, already under immense pressure, begin to self-censor. They avoid speaking out, writing opinion pieces, or even attending peaceful protests, afraid that their presence in the country hangs in the balance. American campuses, once known as places of vibrant debate and free thought, are slowly being transformed into environments where fear overrides intellectual exploration. Even more alarming, these policies echo some of the darkest chapters in American history. As a federal judge observed in the case of a Columbia student who was arrested for political speech, this crackdown resembles the Red Scare and the Palmer raids, where innocent people were targeted simply for their beliefs. Such comparisons aren't made lightly. When the government begins arresting and deporting people for expressing views it doesn't like, it violates the very essence of democratic society. The fact that these actions are occurring under the guise of maintaining order and protecting national interest only makes them more insidious. The reality is that the administration has chosen to substitute power for principle and fear for freedom. If this continues, the message to international students will be chillingly clear. Your voice is only welcome if it echoes ours. In the long term, this erosion of free speech and academic independence threatens not just students, but the foundations of American democracy itself.